and welcome to the Quarantine Room podcast. I will be your host, Vince Alson, and I'll be joined by my co-hosts.
Amaris McGlynn.
Silvestri.
Eric Castellanos.
And Mazza bin Yasmin.
The focus of today's podcast is government corruption, and will be presented by Eric Castellanos.
All right, so to clarify, by government corruption, I mean the lack of faith in the government and how systems in place by the government have ended up hurting the people and the original intent of a society meant to be by the people and for the people, for America at least. So to start it off, I would like to bring up racial disparities in the justice system and the justice system and education system. For example, USSC, which is the United States Sentencing Committee, did a study that took data over 15 years to demonstrate discrimination and disparity between races in criminal justice. So they took for 15 years, they took people that were incarcerated for drugs, misdemeanors, violent crimes, just all these type of crimes from 1995, I believe, to 2000 and I'm not 1995, from 1983 to 2003. They took those crimes and compiled it by races and sentencing and what was the differences and disparities between the cases. So from the statistics and research gathered, they could clearly observe that people, especially Black people, were suffering at a higher sentencing and incarceration rate. Conviction rate than white people and other people of color. They were more likely to be arrested and targeted by the police. I think four times more likely to be incarcerated. And also later on, it's brought up. Well, it's not mentioned in here, but there's socioeconomic reasons for the crime rate in Black people because of redlining, credit score, and all these other systems that we had in the past or currently have. It has made the Black population and people of color in general a poorer people in the America compared to white people, because white people make up around 60-70% of the majority population. Black people, Hispanic people, and any other race really makes up less than 20% compiled together, or 30%. If you add it all together, they make up around 30% or less of the population in America. Based on statistics and research and all and studies, there's a lot of evidence and teachings that show that people are constantly hurt by the government, that the government itself has repeatedly caused damage to society and to certain communities due to racism and prejudice and all this other stuff. For example, in Philadelphia, there was a bombing that happened by the Philadelphia government, or PA government. They bombed a Black neighborhood and nobody was convicted or charged of anything. And it continues to happen to this day, where Black people and people of color are discriminated against, causing more and more injustice, what I consider corruption, because there's nothing really in place to stop this injustice, this oppression of people. It's more to silence the voice of these people, to stop a change in a systematic change. And I would like to further discuss this topic involving my co-host. I would like to know how they would think about the incarceration rates, how they think people are misrepresented in society itself, like stereotypes and all that other stuff. If you guys would like to add on, you can join in now.
I definitely feel like, obviously, like, there's a pretty massive, like, increase and discrepancy in, like, who's incarcerated and for what, right? There's always, like, the notion that if, like, a Black person was found with like marijuana or something, they would be charged more heavily than a white person. And I definitely think there's some there's some truth to that, or a lot actually, I guess. Um, but I also feel like it's I definitely feel like there is a discrepancy. I'll just leave it at that, I guess.
All right.
Yeah. Like if you think about, if you're asking like if the government is biased towards people, definitely, especially our current government system with Donald Trump as our president, there's a definite bias of who he wants America, like who he wants in America and who he doesn't care about, even though like before his presidency and before white people, there were a whole different type of people who were in America.
That's a fair point. Kyle, would you like to add on?
I'm not really sure where I could find like discrepancies. Like maybe in the law, we could find discrepancies. Like people having different jail times, like for different cases. Like what you're saying with marijuana. Like in a previous one, we were talking about marijuana, where like people were getting like white people were getting like lesser jail times than black people could have. That's like one discrepancy I see.
Yeah. And to add on to what you're saying about like marijuana cases and charges, it's found that on average, white people and black people smoke weed or pot, whatever you want to call it, at the same rate. So that would be a discrepancy because if they're both smoking at the same time, why is it that they both aren't arrested at the same rate?
Okay, so I like how you added the issue of redlining in your explanation. So I don't think redlining is just like, it's a systematic denial of services to like residents or and people of specific neighborhoods or communities, right? So we see that happen to like everyone. We see that happen to Black people, to Hispanic people, to like, you notice how quote unquote the ghetto, right? The ghetto is usually like minorities like Black people, Hispanic people, sometimes well, not sometimes, but like often enough it's people who are in like a less fortunate or less favored position in our government system, and it's very, how to say, very bad for us as a people, but then it helps people who are like, not to say not deserving, but people who are better off in the system.
Just to define redlining was a action in the 1900s where the government chose how banks choose which areas could get home loans and stuff like that, and loans in general, by determining whether what race was there. Like the more the better it was, the greener it was, the area was. The worse it was, the redder the area was. That's what's called redlining. And they determine worse by skin color. So the more and more people of color you had in that community or area, they would call it worse and worse. And because of that, the area became impoverished, and white people that lived in that area would leave it and drop the area's income, basically, and only people that were poor could really get into that area.
Is that you think
That's
that's a form of like gentrification?
Yeah, I would say so, because because gentrification, as we know now, is just like white people moving into black neighborhoods, but back then could be it was black people moving into white
Yeah,
neighborhoods,
poorer white neighborhoods. Yeah.
poorer white neighborhoods. Yeah.
Yeah, so like with that, right? How do you think the government corruption could change for all the people that they want to represent?
Well, for that, I would think they would have to address socioeconomic problems that black people and people of color face. Socioeconomic problems are problems that relate to your class, obviously your income, the job you have, and whether you have like a house or not. Because if you have a house, that can be a staple for the economy. That could be something important for you to own, which will improve your wealth in general. So
Yeah,
if
but
we
then
no continue.
wouldn't the privileged people, mostly white people, rebuttal against that?
Well, yeah, because they're accustomed to that kind of society, but it can't be just because they're upset, they shouldn't allow progress to happen. Because if we keep allowing that to happen, more injustice will and corruption, by our definition, will continue to happen to people of color.
Well, how would you fix that? Like, what do you think we should do to be able to like help the corruption be stopped or like and get an end to it?
Well, as I was saying, like you should address the socioeconomic problems by providing Black people with more jobs and a higher political power, and pushing for people to move beyond just the ghetto as it's described by other people. So to do and also by breaking down like social norms and stereotypes, or trying to limit stereotypes of people, because racial bias was also founded to affect people in the hiring process. They were more likely to hire a white male and less likely to hire a Black male. And to
What do they
continue,
have the same
well,
qualifications? Like, is it because of like experience difference?
well, it depends. There are certain studies that would require Black people and white people to have the same experience. There were various studies done. There was one study done in, I think it was Detroit. They took a 30-year long study, and they took kids from this one elementary school and found that Black kids were more likely to be investigated into and stopped by the police and racially profiled, while white kids were able to get jobs easier. They were less likely to be stopped by the police, less likely to have a drug charge brought up against them, even though they consumed drugs at the same rate that the Black people were consuming.
Okay, but don't you think that, like, yes, the government is corrupted, like, a lot, but don't you think that people should also change in a way? Because a lot of people say, oh, well, because these stereotypes are true, or because these type of people do it, that's why they get the result that the government presents, right? Don't you think that they should change that in a way?
Well, who should change what?
Like, the typical of like blacks or Hispanics, they do drugs a lot. Right? So they should
Hmm.
change that, or that there are criminal, like, thugs, quote unquote thugs, who do gang activities and whatnot, which leads to a lot of killing and, criminal activities. So shouldn't people like change that in a way?
Well,
I think
there's
that
no. You can go, Emrys.
okay. Um, I think that it's more that these people are like, how they say black people and Hispanic people do drugs. Like, I think it's because these people are more susceptible, or like their areas, it's more prominent because there's not really people doing much about the conditions of these certain areas. So it's like they were conditioned to like do drugs, because it's so prominent in their areas or their specific neighborhoods that it's expected of these people. So it is what it is at this point. It's normal for them.
Yeah, but
I don't
just
think it's
because it's
right and I don't think it's okay, but
expected, that
it
does not
happens.
mean you should do it. You should go against that and like make the change. It's not a big change, obviously, but it is there. People still notice that.
Yeah. See, what I'm saying is that it's not that these people want to do it. I'm just saying it's easier for these people to do it from these
because
neighborhoods
it's
rather than,
because it's
yeah,
accessible, right?
yeah, it's accessible to them.
Accessible.
That,
Yeah.
yeah.
What about you, Eric? What do you think? Because, like, other than like the black community, the
Sorry, Masvin, you cut out there. What? Could you repeat what you're saying? Hold on.
Okay. I believe she cut out.
Oh,
Um, yeah. So I mean, it's going back to like what everybody was saying about like drugs and like the appearance that certain people were like more susceptible to it. I mean, the thing that people always say is like the government did it, right? How they introduced certain drugs into poorer places, to poorer neighborhoods, to push them, kind of, right?
Yeah.
It's similar to the yeah. But I was just trying to connect that to what you guys said earlier.
Yeah, that's an important point because like the government had the intention of doing that because they know if they can get the majority of people in those small communities doing it, then it would slowly become a social norm. And
Yeah.
because it's a social norm in that area, more and more people will do it, and it will become conditioned to people in that area to do it, making them more susceptible to being arrested and convicted and all this other stuff.
Similar to like what the United States did and European nations did when during what like in early history they introduced a lot of opium into like Asia and stuff like that, so that
Yeah,
they would get addicted to it and then not be strong to
and
defend themselves.
yeah,
Um, I feel like that's like a pretty similar correlation between that and what's done to neighborhoods, poorer or less evident neighborhoods.
yeah. And I also like to keep adding on to that. As I mentioned before, white people and black people consume these drugs at a similar rate or and stuff. So maybe there's also the war on drugs that we have. So maybe legalizing marijuana or certain drugs that might not have so many negative effects to it might help the economy. It might help these people not being arrested and stuff.
Like to that, there is like the big discrepancy, and I feel like is like a pretty massive like sight into government corruption is how before it was legalized in most places, marijuana consumption and use was super shunned upon. It usually carried like a pretty hefty sentence, and people are that were put in prison before it was legalized are still in prison for it. And I just want to know like what your opinion is on that.
Oh wait, could you repeat that?
Like before marijuana was legalized, it was a pretty hefty sentence to be found doing it or using it. Um, and the people who had to be put in prison or jail for those sentences of consumption of marijuana, they're still in jail for those hefty sentences. They weren't in some cases they weren't even
Yeah.
reduced. Do you feel like they should be just like let out, or do you think that there should still be some kind of like recompense for breaking the law, even though it was long past?
It's legal now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like they should be released, and I understand why they don't release them because you also have to look at the prison industrial complex too.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, with prisoners basically being slaves,
Mhm.
and like they themselves are also a vital part to the economy, which we also put a heavy bias on, like a heavy importance on
Yeah.
today's society.
I mean, there's also the unfair side of it because I know there's this case. I don't know exactly who it was, but I know this African American man. He was sentenced to I think 20 years or more for having 4.4 grams of marijuana or possession of drugs, right? Compared to this other recent event where like two influencers who had 400 grams of possession of marijuana in their system, but they got a bail. They paid the bail, and they're free to do whatever now. So, what do you think about that?
Well, I feel like money is also an influence there. Well, if you take an average person, then you take a influencer, the there's going to be way more leniency to the influencer because they have a uh, a standing in society. They stand out. They have influence. They can possibly start a movement. That's why like when we see famous people, celebrities, and all these other people, when they get like drug charges or certain uh, charges brought against them, they're more likely to get out of it because they have the money, they have the wealth to get out of those situations, while an average person doesn't. So to continue on, I would like to also address how in the education there's also a lot of discrepancy between black people and people of color getting educated between and white people getting educated. There's a discrepancy there on the education and funding that schools get. Um, it's seen in like test scores and standardized testing, the SAT, where some studies shown that on average, white students that went to wealthier areas, they scored way higher on the SAT compared to a black student, which most likely came from a impoverished area.
I think that's because of like the amount of information I have. Like, they would like obviously the white people who have like wealthier areas would have like updated and like better textbooks and like teachers they would have, and like that's like a huge difference in education. Like the difference in textbooks could be like the difference is like it could be the amount of information. Like if one is like more false or one could be one like second or older version of it that it could have been disproven in the newer version.
I mean, yeah, but like for SATs is very controversial because it's not what we learn in school, it's what you should already have like in knowledge, you know? It's not what
Prior
you're
knowledge
learning
of.
currently. It's exactly like so this comes with the benefits, right? If you are rich, wealthy, you could take like extra tutoring classes and whatnot to like get more knowledge on how you should take it compared to someone who is from a poor background who just have to learn from what they're taught in school and maybe self-taught, you know? So that's kind of how privilege would go with, because if you have the privilege of having money, you could take more classes and learn what the SAT would like teach on compared to someone who doesn't have the money to get tutor but have to learn by themselves.
I
I
mean,
definitely agree with what Osmond is talking about
yeah. I
because
oh yeah, you can go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, that's fine. It's fine.
Okay, so like as she was saying, like people who have the money to have tutors or have access to tutors, it's not exactly easy for people who are not of like a lower class, but like have lower income or are not able or not really all that beneficial in what they're doing, right? These people who don't have the same access as these people with more money, right? It's it's that these guys are what to how to put it. They don't have the same abilities to not abilities facilities, yes, facilities to succeed as do these people who have the money. So you can see that in New York a lot, actually. So if you have people who come from, wealthier neighborhoods rather than people who come from like poor neighborhoods, it's like you can see a really big difference in the way our schooling is, you know? Like they have more money for teachers, for tutors, for more clubs and classes, rather than kids who will come from a poor neighborhood and go to poorer schools. They have just the standard academic classes, and that's really it, you know?
I mean, do you think that like, I mean, I think that as like we've grown up, that's kind of like been less of the case that like, black schools have received less funding, and I honestly feel like they're receiving more funding and more, um, like they can more they have more to show for it, right? Like in some cases, it's like most schools want more black students now because it equates to more money. So it's like, do you think that that's like a fair sentiment that like students equal money for the school and they might be selectively choosing people like depending on their race or ethnicity? Like I understand how like this can be easily flipped over to, well, white people have had that same thing forever. But do you think that maybe it's flipping around now a little bit in some way?
No, I understand what you're saying and where you're coming from, but I do agree with that. I do because it is seen now like a lot of not private schools, but like certain schools with like a higher standing, like specialized schools, are like being more open to people who have less, and they do get money for it. But I don't necessarily think it's a good thing to like because some people do deserve it, and then some people don't deserve it. If you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to say that you know people from poor people don't deserve it, because some of them do. Some people are very smart, and
definitely.
they they definitely have the abilities to succeed with these schools and these classes and stuff like that. But there are also people who come from poor neighborhoods that don't deserve it, and then there are also people who come from richer neighborhoods that deserve it, but also people who don't. You see what I'm saying? It could be like both. It's like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, basically.
There are people who do need it, and then people who don't need it, right?
Yeah, because
So
someone who's failing in normal classes can go take the test and pass with the almost perfect whatever and get into the best school there is compared to someone who studied so hard and they failed, you know?
yeah,
Well, I feel like there would be more factors into it. Like they would look at your extracurriculars and like all those other tasks that you have done out of school that make it seem like you're a better person to like join your school. I feel like those also matter to like not just like your
Yeah,
grade, your SAT
now
score.
they look at that. Now most colleges, they don't care about SATs as much because like SAT is just a test, it's just one test that before people used to make such a big deal and used to be like a whole your test results into what type of person you are and what type of student you are. But now it's like your characteristics and how you are with the community and all.
Yeah, and I feel like that's an important thing to address or focus on rather than your test scores because knowing the type of person you are going into the school and seeing that you have community service, you can help people, you can stand by yourself, you can advocate for yourself is more important than having 1500 on the SAT because that won't help you in life, but being advocating for yourself and standing up for yourself and helping others is something that could relate to real world topics that could possibly help you later on in the future. Also, earlier when Vince was talking about how students equal money, well, it would have to. I don't think that should be the case because each person has their own value, each person has their own worth, and you can't put a dollar sign on one person compared to another person because that's just not moral, I guess. And especially these are people's lives.
Um, yeah, but the thing is, a lot of obviously, like I guess I've noticed it. Maybe other people haven't. But in high schools and colleges, in like our lifetime, have shifted. And I see it, and I guess maybe I'm just like racist. I'm not denying it, but you know, but I've noticed that they really, really want um, people that are minorities. I guess they want people who are in underrepresented groups more than they would want somebody who was white. That's just my
Yeah.
opinion, and I've seen that especially with like some colleges more recently as I was looking into them. They really only want people from minority groups. If you're white, you have to have like a substantially higher grade on SATs, ACTs, and grade point average than like a black student or a Hispanic student would warrant, I suppose. That specific college is actually NYU. Um, they have like super very weird and like to me very weird requirements in order to get into them, and like
Hmm.
reasons that they would stop like they would reject a student. Like they
Yeah.
really don't care about the quality of the student. They care, in my opinion, right? They care more about the color of the student.
Well, do you think that's trying to make up for like the past discrepancies
Yes,
that these races
yes,
have
I do.
faced?
Yes.
So do you think it's more unfair to do that now?
I don't think it's unfair, but I think it's more like it's like, I mean, if I feel like if I don't know, if white people were treated that way and it was like, oh well, like I mean, I guess they were, but it's like kind of like a backhanded compliment or like a backhanded like thing, right? It's like, oh well, because you were like your past, your ancestors or whatever, your minority group has had like these problems, oh well, you get like special treatment. Like I get it, that's fine. I'm fine with it in reality, but it's just like it's weird when you see it and it's so like blatant. Like how like you guys are a part of minority groups more than I am, obviously. So like, does that make
Mhm.
you guys feel weird? Like when you see stuff like that, that's like will accept like a Hispanic student over like a white student, or you know?
It's
I mean,
funny
a little bit.
because
Sometimes it's kind of uncomfortable, but sometimes I kind of get it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
yeah,
get
because like
that.
for our school, like in auto, like even though it's auto, okay, boys related, but we are like diverse, right? Because it's mostly black kids and Hispanics, right? But now they're trying to spread out to other communities like white people and all that, even though we are in a white neighborhood. Our school is in a neighborhood, so it's kind of like they want to go away from their reputation of it's mostly like a black school with like troubling past to some to like opening up to more like white people, or or like other races, like have more different reputation for them.
Yeah, I get that. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thank you for listening. And the next time, Vince will be presenting information on genetic modification.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.